This is a journey into sound.
Like musical chairs. Very musical chairs. So, we all know that this is based on the famous Jean Cocteau film from 1950, an incredible avant-garde film that kind of was revolutionary in the history of French filmmaking and filmmaking in general. When was your first interaction with Cocteau?
1952.
1952?
Yeah.
Was this when you were first in Paris?
No, I was first in Paris in 1954, but I was, the three films, La Belle et la Bête, et Orphée, and Les Enfants Terribles, the three films were made between 47 and 52. And they form in my view, they form a kind of testament together. And I saw them as when they first came to the States in a little theater in the south side of Chicago. In those days, in the 50s, you didn't see foreign films very much. And these did have subtitles, and I saw these three films at that time, probably in the same year, probably 50. I got there in 52. So I probably saw them in 53 and 54. And they stayed with me for 40 years. I finally began to work on them in 91, almost 40 years later. But I always, somewhere, I had never forgotten those films. There was something to be said about, Cocteau was an amazing writer for the theater, as we know. And these three films together formed this is a testament, but there's something that's real, this is a beautiful performance. I'm so glad I could hear it tonight. When Cocteau was doing this particular piece, it was really done in three layers. There was one layer which was, of course, the story of Orphée, which is probably the most written opera, composed opera. The year I was writing it, I had three friends also writing Orphées. There have been thousands of Orphées. Literally, it's a wonderful story. You can't get a better story than this. And first of all, there was the story of Orphée itself, which of course is from the Greek Orphée. Then he set it in post-World War II Paris. So there's a whole very important layer to this, which when you see it and you see the underworld and the tribunal and all this stuff and the Morse code and all this stuff, you can't, and of course at that time, when I saw it, I was 15 or 16, so I was also very aware of the kind of cultural baggage that came with that time.
Those images would have been very familiar to
anybody who saw it that time.
Right.
And they exist in the operas that's done today. I saw it in Portland, I think, didn't I, Sam?
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't see it though. I saw it in Portland. I didn't see it. I won't see it here. I'm sorry to say.
We don't really have it. We don't really have it set. It's more set in modern time, I guess.
There's a third part of this, which is really these works, in my view. I don't know anyone who shares this view, but I don't know anyone who spends so much time with this material as I have. These are very autobiographical works. They're about Cocteau. And especially Orphée, the poet. There are hilariously funny things that happen in the beginning when he's sitting with a critic, and the critic says, and he meets there's a party going on in a cafe, and the young poet who you saw is being feted by the crowds. And Orphée is really annoyed because he wasn't a very famous poet, and now this young fellow has taken over. And they banter about this wrong, and then finally the critic says, but he says his work, his movement is called nudism. And he said, what's that? He said, and he shows them a book, and the pages are empty. and Orphée says, that's ridiculous. And he said, nothing can be too ridiculous.
Exactly.
So the more ridiculous, the better. He said, the public adores Sagesse. And Orphée says, but the public loves me. And you remember what the critic says? He says,
the public is alone.
The public is alone.
So this Cocteau was at his height, and maybe there was a sagesse in his life.
Well, no, he wasn't at his height. His height was a few years before.
And there was
his
a
real height
sagesse
was
maybe in his
the
life.
filmmaking was at his height. But as a famous author and poet and painter and writer or novelist, he was famous between the wars. He was a friend and worked with people like Stravinsky and Villot, and it was a very, that period was kind of wiped out by the war, and we kind of forgot that when the war was over and he came back, and there was all kinds of funny things going on. Accusations were being handed around, and people were being discredited and all that, and it was a difficult time, especially for an aging lion like Orphée. So anyway, there are a lot of funny things I could tell you about this thing, but anyway, this part of it I thought was extremely interesting. And as I looked at the pieces, the three pieces, I saw that the pieces were really a testament about creativity. And you were mentioning that, Sam was mentioning that when the princess says, she actually says to him, in order for a poet to become immortal, a sacrifice has to be made. And that, it gets very much to the heart. It's about life and death and immortality. That's what this opera's about. And he was that good a writer for the theater. And when I think about it, I've done a lot of operas, but of the writers I've worked with, I've never done an opera to a Shakespeare. Shakespeare was the great writer, without question. But the person who understood character, development, the timing, the way things happen in the theater, I don't know anyone who was better than Cocteau.
And why was it that this piece lasted with you for so long, and it wasn't until the 90s that you decided to pick it up?
Sam, why have you been doing it for 5 years? The Cocteau, the material is very sticky. It's hard to get it out of your hands.
So did you kind of let it live in you for a while?
That happens a lot to me. I think of things for a long, long time before I may write them. La Belle, I thought of that. By the time I got around to doing it, I knew how to do it. But I had thought about it, and I had become, I almost, I could say, waited till I was a mature enough composer so that I could do it. If I had tried to write that when I was in my 30s, I wouldn't have been able to. I wrote this when I was in my 50s and 60s.